Audrey, those tables aren't going to bust themselves.
Already did them, Mr. Peters.
Then do them again. I don't pay you to stand around daydreaming.
Poor Waitress gave her last meal to an old man in the rain the next morning. She was fired for it. Audrey Steve had no idea that shivering stranger held her entire future in his hands. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now let's begin. The fluorescent lights of the Silver Spoon Diner hummed their usual tired song, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even the freshest food look days old. Audrey Steve dragged the damp rag across booth 7 for what felt like the 100th time that night, her feet screaming inside shoes that had given up any pretense of structural integrity weeks ago. The duct tape she'd wrapped around the sole of her right shoe was starting to peel away, and she could feel the cold seeping through with each step. 10:47. 13 minutes until closing. She moved to the condiment station, mechanically checking ketchup levels, wiping down salt shakers, her body operating on autopilot while her mind did the math it did every night. Rent was due in 3 days. She was already 2 months behind. Mrs. Chun had been patient, but patience had limits. The eviction notice folded in her back pocket crinkled slightly as she bent to retrieve a dropped napkin, a constant reminder that she was one mistake away from homelessness. Audrey. Clinton Peters' voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Those tables aren't going to bust themselves. She didn't look up. Already did them, Mr. Peters. Then do them again. I don't pay you to stand around daydreaming. The lie was so casual it barely registered anymore. He paid her $7.25 an hour and made sure she never got enough hours to qualify for benefits. But Audrey kept her face neutral, kept her voice level. Yes, sir. She felt his eyes follow her as she moved back toward the booths, that particular weight that made her skin crawl. Clinton Peters was 40 years old with the kind of face that looked perpetually dissatisfied, as if the world owed him something better than managing a run-down diner on the East Side. He'd been her boss for 8 months, and in that time, he'd perfected the art of the cutting comment, the impossible standard, the casual cruelty that never quite crossed the line into something she could report. Audrey reached for the water pitcher and poured herself a glass, drinking it slowly. The trick was to fill your stomach with water when you couldn't fill it with food. She'd learned that 3 years ago when the factory closed and good jobs became fairy tales people told to keep hope alive. That's when she saw him. At first, he was just a shadow beyond the rain-streaked window, a darker shape against the storm. But as she watched, the shape resolved into a man, old, white, his clothes plastered to his skeletal frame by the downpour. He wasn't moving, wasn't begging, wasn't doing anything except standing there in the deluge like he'd forgotten how to get out of it. Audrey watched him for a minute, then 2, then 5. The old man never moved. Rain hammered down on him, running off his gray hair in streams, and he just stood there, leaning slightly against the brick wall like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Something about his absolute stillness made her chest tighten. Don't even think about it, Audrey. She jumped. Clinton had materialized beside her, following her gaze to the window. That bum's not our problem, he continued, his voice flat with contempt. You start feeding every piece of trash that wanders by, we'll have a line around the block. Audrey's hands tightened on the rag. He's just standing there in the rain. And that's his choice. Probably too drunk or high to know better. Clinton moved closer, and she caught the smell of his cologne mixed with something sharper, whiskey, maybe, from the flask he thought no one knew about. I see you giving away food. That's theft. Company policy. Understand. I understand. But she was already moving. The takeout container sat on the counter where she'd left it, chicken sandwich and fries, the dinner she'd been planning to eat on her break that had never come. Her stomach growled in protest as she picked it up, but her hands were steady as she walked toward the door. Audrey. Clinton's voice was a warning now. I'm not kidding. She pushed through the door anyway. The rain hit her like a physical blow, cold and sharp and immediate. Within seconds, her uniform was soaked through, her hair plastered to her skull. The November chill cut straight to her bones. She'd walked 2 months behind on rent and into a storm for a stranger, and some distant part of her brain wondered if she'd finally lost her mind. The old man didn't react to her approach at first. Up close, she could see the gray stubble on his gaunt cheeks, the way his hands shook even as they gripped his own elbows. But his eyes, pale blue, startling against his weathered face. Those were sharp and clear and aware. Here. Audrey held out the container, her voice nearly lost in the sound of rain hammering the pavement. Please, take it. His hands trembled as they reached for the food, and for a moment their fingers touched, his ice cold, hers only slightly warmer. He stared at the container like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then his eyes lifted to hers, and something passed between them. Not pity from her or gratitude from him, but something deeper. A moment of pure human recognition. Two people seeing past the surfaces to the struggling, dignified souls beneath. What's your name? His voice was rough, raw from cold or disuse or both. Audrey. Audrey Steve. He nodded slowly, deliberately, as if committing it to memory with the weight of a vow. I'm James. Thank you, Audrey Steve. He paused, his gaze intense despite the water streaming down his face. Not for the food. For seeing me. Something in those words made her throat tight. She nodded, unable to speak, and turned back toward the diner. Clinton was waiting just inside the door, his face purple with rage. The moment she crossed the threshold, he was on her. That's a write-up. Your third one this month. You're on thin ice, girl. The way he said girl made it clear it wasn't about her age. One more screw-up and you're done. You understand me? Yes, sir. Audrey's voice was barely a whisper. Get back to work. And pray I don't dock your pay for that stunt. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of condemnation, Clinton's pointed comments, the way he found fault with every task, the satisfaction in his voice when he reminded her that people like her were replaceable. Audrey cleaned and nodded and swallowed every word, because what choice did she have? At 11:30, she clocked out and stepped back into the rain. It had lessened to a steady drizzle, but it was enough to soak through her jacket as she walked to the bus stop. The old man was gone. The spot where he'd stood was empty except for the rain. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but Audrey found she didn't regret giving away her dinner. In a world that constantly told her she was worthless, that act of kindness was the only thing that made her feel human, even if it was a luxury she couldn't afford. 3 blocks away, James Quick sat in the back of a black sedan, the heater running full blast, his borrowed rags exchanged for a wool coat Marcus had brought. The chicken sandwich sat untouched in his lap as he stared at the diner's fading lights. Well, Marcus Chun, his executive assistant of 20 years, didn't need to ask the full question. James was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. Move up the diner acquisition timeline. I want to visit the Silver Spoon location tomorrow morning. Early. How early? 7:30. And Marcus? James's voice had gone cold in a way Marcus recognized. The voice that had broken companies and ended careers. I want a full background check on the manager. Clinton Peters. Everything. By morning. Consider it done. Marcus pulled away from the curb, but not before catching his boss's expression in the rearview mirror. James Quick was still staring at the diner, his pale blue eyes reflecting the neon sign. And he was smiling, the thin, dangerous smile of a man who'd just found a mission. The alarm pierced through Audrey's sleep at 6:15, dragging her from dreams of food into the hollow reality of her studio apartment. Her stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside out, a gnawing emptiness that had kept her awake half the night. She'd tried the water trick again before bed, but water couldn't fool your body forever. She dressed in the dim morning light filtering through her single window, pulling on her spare uniform, the one without the stain on the collar, and her jacket that was still damp from last night's rain. The eviction notice caught her eye from where she'd left it on the counter, and she deliberately looked away. One crisis at a time. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. Audrey made it with 2 minutes to spare, but the bus itself was 12 minutes late, crawling through streets still littered with branches and debris from the storm. A massive tree limb blocked 2 lanes on Henderson Avenue, traffic backing up for 6 blocks while a city crew worked chainsaws in the gray morning light. Audrey watched the minutes tick by on her phone, anxiety building in her chest like pressure. 7:43, 7:49, 7:53. She burst through the diner door at exactly 8 o'clock, 7 minutes late, already forming her apology, already knowing it wouldn't matter. But the words died in her throat. The Silver Spoon diner looked like it had been invaded by a different species. Every booth was filled not with the usual morning crowd of construction workers and truckers, but with men and women in dark suits and crisp white shirts. They sat with tablets and leather portfolios, drinking coffee and speaking in low, professional tones that seemed alien in this grease-stained space. And there, standing in the center of the dining room like a ringmaster waiting for his cue, was Clinton Peters. He wore his best shirt, the blue one he saved for regional manager visits, and his expression when he spotted Audrey was nothing short of triumphant. Well, his voice carried across the entire diner, cutting through every conversation. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Audrey's face burned. Every head in the room turned toward her. Mr. Peters, I'm so sorry. The bus was delayed because of storm cleanup on Henderson, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. Clinton walked toward her slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone could see, everyone could hear. No accountability. No respect for the schedule. He turned to address the suited visitors like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. When I took over this location 8 months ago, discipline was non-existent. The previous manager let these people walk all over him. Late arrivals, long breaks, attitudes. He said these people the way someone might say cockroaches, and Audrey felt something shrivel inside her chest. But I've implemented strict protocols, Clinton continued, warming to his performance. Documentation. Standards. Because you can't run a profitable operation if you're soft. These people need structure. They need consequences. Audrey tried again, her voice smaller now. Sir, if you just let me explain. Save it. Clinton's eyes were hard, glittering with something that looked almost like pleasure. I've documented your infractions, Audrey. Multiple instances of tardiness. The unauthorized inventory distribution. He let that phrase hang in the air, loaded with meaning and the attitude. The constant questioning of management decisions. I never questioned. You're done. The words fell like a guillotine blade. Terminated. Effective immediately. The room had gone completely silent. Audrey could hear the hiss of the coffee maker, the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen where Carlos and Miguel had surely stopped working to listen. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, could feel herself being transformed from a person into an example. Mr. Peters, please. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. I need this job. I'm already behind on rent, and I should have thought about that before you gave away company property to some homeless drunk. Clinton's smile was thin and cold. Take off your apron. Audrey's hands shook as she untied the apron strings. The fabric felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every bill she couldn't pay, every meal she couldn't afford. She folded it carefully, some ingrained instinct for dignity, and held it out. Clinton snatched it from her hands. Now empty your pockets. All of them. What? The word came out as a whisper. Company policy. We have to ensure no theft when an employee is terminated. He said it loudly enough for everyone to hear, the implication clear. Not only was she being fired, she was being branded a potential thief. Audrey's hands trembled as she pulled out her pockets. The lint-covered eviction notice fell to the floor. A handful of coins, 63 cents, scattered across the tile. A wrapped piece of hard candy she'd been saving. Clinton made a show of examining each item, making her stand there while he verified she hadn't stolen silverware or ketchup packets or whatever petty thing he could imagine. Behind the counter, Sandra and Keisha watched in frozen silence, their faces pale. They both had kids, bills, lives balanced on the same razor's edge Audrey was falling from. They both knew that speaking up, showing sympathy, could make them next. You can go now, Clinton said finally, dismissing her with a wave of his hand like she was a servant being excused. Audrey bent to gather her coins with as much dignity as she could summon. The eviction notice she left where it had fallen. Let him see it. Let him know what he'd done. When she straightened, her eyes swept the room one last time. Most of the suits looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to an execution. A few watched with the detached interest of people observing a documentary about poverty in a foreign country. But one man, older, maybe 60, with distinguished silver hair and an expensive charcoal suit, sat very still at the corner booth. His coffee sat untouched in front of him. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers slightly splayed, as if he was physically restraining himself. And his eyes, pale blue eyes that seemed to catch every detail, every word, every casual cruelty. Those eyes met hers for just a second. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. Recognition. No, that was impossible. She'd never seen this man before in her life. Audrey broke eye contact first, walking toward the door on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The other customers had resumed eating, the moment already forgotten, just another piece of morning drama to season their eggs and hash browns. She pushed through the door into air that tasted like rain. Sure enough, the drizzle had started again, as if the universe was committed to the pathetic fallacy of her life. Audrey made it half a block before the tears came, mixing with the rain so thoroughly she couldn't tell which was which. 2 months behind on rent was now 3 months. No job meant no references. No references meant no chance at another waitressing position. The spiral was so clear, so inevitable, that it almost seemed efficient. This was how people disappeared, she thought. Not all at once, but in increments. A job, an apartment, a sense that the world had any place for you at all. She didn't see the silver-haired man stand up, his movement so sudden that the other suits looked up in surprise. She didn't hear the absolute silence in his voice when he spoke, a quietness that was somehow more frightening than any shout. "Mr. Peters," he said, his pale blue eyes fixed on Clinton with the focus of a predator spotting prey. "We need to talk. Now." Inside the diner, Clinton Peters felt the first cold finger of doubt trace down his spine. But he pushed it away, smiled his best manager smile, and said, "Of course, sir. I'm always available to discuss operational efficiency." He had no idea that in the next 5 minutes, his entire world would detonate. He had no idea that the homeless man from last night and the executive in the corner booth were the same person. He had no idea that every word he'd said, every casual cruelty, had been not just witnessed but cataloged by someone with the power to destroy him. Clinton Peters walked toward that corner booth, still believing he'd impressed them, still believing that showing strength meant showing cruelty, still believing the world worked the way he thought it did. He was about to learn differently. Clinton Peters settled into the booth across from the silver-haired man with the confidence of someone who believed he'd just executed a masterclass in management. He smoothed his tie, composed his features into an expression of professional seriousness, and leaned back against the cracked vinyl. "Sometimes you have to make hard decisions," he began, his voice carrying just enough gravity to sound important. "Show them you won't tolerate. My name is James Quick." The interruption was so quiet, so measured, that it took Clinton a second to register it had happened. But something in the man's tone, a weight, an authority that seemed to press down on the air itself, made his next words die in his throat. "As of Monday, I became the majority shareholder of this restaurant chain. 60%. James Quick's pale blue eyes never left Clinton's face, cataloging every micro-expression, every tell. "I've spent the past week visiting locations unannounced, assessing not just the numbers, but the culture." The blood drained from Clinton's face so fast he actually felt dizzy. "Mr. Quick, I had no idea you were." "Last night," James continued as if Clinton hadn't spoken, "I stood outside this diner in the rain for 3 hours. Watching. Testing." He leaned forward slightly, and Clinton found himself pressing back against the booth. 14 people walked past me. Customers. Employees. People leaving the bar across the street. 14 people saw a human being standing in a storm and decided I wasn't their problem. Clinton's mind was racing, trying to calculate, trying to find the angle that would save him. "Sir, if this is about the woman I just fired." One person stopped. James's voice cut through Clinton's excuse like a scalpel through tissue. "A waitress named Audrey Steve. She gave me her dinner. Her only dinner. Do you know what she said when I thanked her?" Clinton's mouth had gone dry. Around them, the diner had fallen into a silence so complete he could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "She said, everyone deserves to eat." James let the words settle, let them echo in the space where Clinton's justifications should have been. "Then she went back inside, where you wrote her up. For human decency. For seeing another person as human." "Mr. Quick, I can explain." "Explain what, exactly?" For the first time, something like heat entered James's voice, though it remained quiet, controlled. "How you wrote her up for showing compassion to what you assumed was a homeless man. How you just fired her, publicly humiliated her, for being 7 minutes late after a storm that delayed half the buses in this city." Clinton opened his mouth, but no words came. "I reviewed the surveillance footage from last night," James continued, his tone returning to that terrible, measured calm. "All of it. You took home 3 full containers of ribs at 9:47 p.m. on company time. Mark them as waste in the system. He paused, letting that sink in. No one wrote you up for that, did they? The other suits in the diner, James's team, Clinton now realized with growing horror, had stopped even pretending to look at their tablets. Every eye was on this booth, watching the execution with the detached interest of people who'd seen this play out before in other locations, with other managers who thought cruelty was leadership. Sir, the profit margins at this location have increased 18% since I took over, Clinton tried desperately. I've implemented cost-saving measures that, by cutting staff to the bone and pocketing the difference in waste reduction, yes. James's expression could have been carved from granite. I saw the numbers. I saw how you schedule employees just under the threshold for benefits. How you've had 7 different workers quit in 8 months. How your turnover rate is 3 times higher than any other location in the region. He leaned back, his eyes never leaving Clinton's face. Tell me, Mr. Peters, do you know what costs more than employee wages? Constant recruitment. Constant training. The reputation damage from angry former staff members posting about conditions on social media. The health code violations that happen when exhausted workers make mistakes. Clinton felt the trap closing, but couldn't stop himself from defending. I was trying to run a tight ship. To show discipline. These people. James repeated the phrase with surgical precision. You've said that twice this morning. Once during your little performance, and once just now. Each time referring to the primarily Black and Hispanic staff you manage. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. I wonder what you mean by these people, Mr. Peters. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Clinton's face flushed red. I didn't mean, I'm not racist, if that's what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. James stood slowly, and something about the movement made it feel like a judge rising to deliver a sentence. Audrey Steve is rehired, effective immediately, as assistant manager with a salary of $42,000 annually plus benefits. She'll be reporting directly to me while I restructure this location. The words hit Clinton like physical blows. You can't. You, Mr. Peters, are suspended without pay pending a full investigation into your management practices. Specifically, the discrepancies in waste reporting, the scheduling violations, and 3 formal complaints filed with corporate HR that were never properly investigated. James's voice remained quiet, but it carried to every corner of the diner. Security will escort you out. As if summoned, 2 men in dark suits appeared from where they'd been sitting near the door. Not corporate executives. These had the build and bearing of actual security professionals. Clinton's face cycled through emotions like a malfunctioning traffic light. Shock, rage, panic, calculation. You can't do this. His voice rose, drawing stares from the kitchen where Carlos and Miguel had emerged to watch. I've increased profits here by 18%. You've created a hostile work environment, violated labor laws, and committed theft. James's expression didn't change. Those aren't the actions of a good manager. They're the actions of a bully who found a position with just enough power to hurt people who couldn't fight back. This is bullshit. Clinton was on his feet now, his face purple. You stand out there in the rain for one night, playing dress-up, and you think you understand how to run a diner. You think you understand what it takes to manage people like. He caught himself, but too late. People like what, Mr. Peters? James's voice was soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. Clinton's mouth worked soundlessly. The security guards moved closer. I think we're done here, James said. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Peters from the premises. Make sure he surrenders all keys and access cards. If he returns to this property for any reason other than his exit interview with HR, call the police. You'll regret this, Clinton hissed as the guards took position on either side of him. I'll sue. You'll do nothing. James's voice cut through the bluster like a knife through butter. Because if you pursue legal action, I'll make every piece of surveillance footage, every HR complaint, every instance of wage theft and labor law violation available to the Department of Labor. And trust me, Mr. Peters, they're very interested in managers who steal from both their employers and their employees. The fight went out of Clinton like air from a punctured tire. He let the security guards lead him toward the back office to collect his personal belongings, his expensive shirt suddenly looking cheap under the fluorescent lights. The diner remained silent for a long moment after he disappeared. Then James turned to address the room, his voice carrying clearly. For anyone concerned about retaliation for what you've witnessed this morning, let me be clear, this company does not tolerate intimidation, discrimination, or abuse of power. If anyone experiences pressure to stay silent about management misconduct, you have my personal email. He gestured to one of his team members, who immediately began distributing business cards. Use it. Sandra, still standing behind the counter with her order pad clutched to her chest, found her voice. Is Audrey really coming back? Yes. James pulled out his phone. If someone can give me her number, I'd like to call her immediately. Keisha rattled it off from memory, her voice shaking slightly. James dialed, then stepped away from the booth toward the relative quiet near the front door. 3 blocks away, Audrey sat on a bench at a bus stop, her hair still dripping rain, trying to figure out what came next. Food bank tomorrow. Apply for unemployment. Maybe that temp agency on 5th Street, though they usually wanted references, and Clinton would burn her alive in any reference call. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Probably a spam call about her car's extended warranty, but she answered anyway because right now even a robot voice was better than the silence of her own thoughts. Hello, Ms. Steve. The voice was male, older, with a precise quality that marked it as educated, professional. This is James Quick. I believe we met last night. In the rain. Audrey's breath caught. The old man. But that didn't make sense. His voice had been rough, broken. This voice was clear, authoritative. I don't understand, she said slowly. I know, and I apologize for the deception, but I'd like to offer you a position. Assistant manager, starting immediately, with full benefits and a salary we can discuss in detail. He paused. Can you come back to the diner? Audrey looked down at her soaked shoes, her empty pockets, the rain falling steadily around her. In any other circumstances, this would sound like a scam, a cruel joke, another humiliation waiting to happen. But she remembered those pale blue eyes in the rain, the way he'd said foreseeing me like it meant something more than courtesy. I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. 2 weeks into her new position, Audrey Steve arrived at the Silver Spoon Diner at 6:30 in the morning with a confidence she was still getting used to wearing. Her new shoes, actual work shoes without duct tape, purchased with her first paycheck, clicked against the pavement with a sound that felt like victory. She had keys now. Real keys. Assistant manager keys. Inside, she flipped on the lights and started the coffee, moving through the opening routine with the efficiency of someone who'd worked food service for a decade, but now had the authority to make actual decisions. She'd reorganized the prep station, implemented a new inventory system, and created a schedule that ensured no one was consistently shortchanged on hours. The staff had responded with a loyalty that still surprised her. Even Sandra and Keisha, who'd watched her humiliation that first morning, now sought her advice and backed her decisions. But not everyone was happy. The whispers had started about a week ago, subtle at first. Audrey would walk into the kitchen and conversation would stop. She'd catch fragments, diversity higher, and sleeping her way up, and just wait until she screws up. The words were never said to her face, never loud enough to confront directly, but they circulated like poison through the staff. Janice, one of the older white waitresses who'd been there longest, was particularly cold. She'd worked under Clinton for 2 years and apparently appreciated his management style, or at least benefited from it. She'd been his favorite, got the best shifts, the most generous schedule. Now she treated Audrey's instructions with barely concealed contempt. I've been doing this for 15 years, Janice said when Audrey suggested a better system for handling takeout orders. I think I know what I'm doing. Audrey had let it go. Pick your battles, James had advised during one of their morning meetings. Some people will resist change no matter how much sense it makes. But the rumors persisted. Got worse. Yesterday, Audrey had overheard 2 kitchen workers discussing whether she and James were having an affair, their tone making it clear they'd already decided the answer. The fact that James was 30 years her senior and treated her with nothing but professional respect didn't seem to factor into their calculations. She tried not to let it bother her. Tried to focus on the work, on the fact that she'd paid rent, actually paid rent, on time, for the first time in 4 months. On the fact that she'd bought groceries without having to calculate every penny. On the fact that she had health insurance now, actual health insurance with a card and everything. But the whispers wore on her, a constant reminder that some people would never accept that she deserved this position on merit. What Audrey didn't know was that the whispers had a source. Clinton Peters sat in his apartment, a place that had once felt adequate but now seemed to shrink around him daily, and stared at his phone. Suspended pending investigation. The words were a constant loop in his head, accompanied by the running calculation of bills he couldn't pay, the lease on his car coming due, the girlfriend who'd stopped returning his calls once she learned he wasn't a manager anymore. His lawyer had been blunt. They have documentation, surveillance footage, HR complaints. Unless you can prove the new assistant manager is incompetent or criminal, you're finished. The seed of an idea had planted itself that night, ugly and desperate, but increasingly appealing as his savings dwindled and his prospects dimmed. He still had keys. They'd asked for them, but he'd turned in his spare set, claiming it was all he had. The Real set sat in his pocket, a small piece of power in a situation where he'd been stripped of everything else. He'd started small. A phone call here, a text message there to employees he knew resented Audrey's promotion. Just between us, but I heard she only got the job because of quotas. Quick was scared of a discrimination lawsuit. Another message. Saw them having dinner together. Alone. At a nice place. You do the math. The rumors spread like wildfire because people wanted to believe them. It was easier to accept that Audrey had slept or lucked her way into the position than to acknowledge their own complicity in not standing up to Clinton when he'd abused his power. But rumors weren't enough. Clinton needed something concrete. Something that would prove she was untrustworthy. That would make James Quick question his judgment. That would maybe, just maybe, open the door for Clinton to return with a C. I was right about her all along vindication. On Thursday night, 2 weeks after his suspension, Clinton drove to the diner at 11:30 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for Audrey's modest used sedan. She'd finally been able to afford a car, he noted with bitter resentment. The lights were off except for the security lighting. He used his key on the back entrance, the lock turning smoothly, and slipped inside. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he moved with purpose through the dark kitchen to the small office. The safe sat in its usual spot, and he knew the combination. He'd set it himself months ago and never changed it. Inside was the weekend cash, $3,200 in mixed bills for making change and handling the customers who still paid in cash. Clinton's hands shook as he counted out $1,500. Not all of it. Taking all of it would be too obvious, too desperate. But $1,500 was enough to be serious, enough to warrant police involvement. He pocketed the money, then looked around the office. Audrey's name tag sat on the desk where she'd left it. She usually clipped it on during her shift rather than wearing it during the morning prep. Clinton picked it up, then deliberately knocked over a stack of papers, placing the name tag half hidden beneath them, as if it had fallen there during a hurried exit. The schedule hung on the wall. He photographed it with his phone, making sure the image showed that Audrey had closed last night, that she'd been the last one with access. Back in his car, Clinton made an anonymous call to the corporate hotline, his voice muffled by a handkerchief. There's money missing from the Silver Spoon Diner on East Street. The new assistant manager had access. You should check the safe. Then he drove home and waited. The call came to James Quick at 7:15 Friday morning, just as he was reviewing reports from another location. The corporate security director's voice was apologetic but firm. Sir, we received a tip about missing funds at the East Street location. I've already sent a team. Given the sensitivity, I thought you should know immediately. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. How much? $1,500. And sir, the anonymous caller specifically mentioned Miss Steve. By the time James arrived at the diner, 2 police officers were already there, along with corporate security. Audrey stood in the office, her face ashen, her new confidence shattered into something that looked horribly like the defeated woman he'd first met in the rain. I didn't take anything, she said when she saw him, her voice breaking. Mr. Quick, I swear to you, I would never. The safe was opened sometime after closing last night, the security director explained. Miss Steve was the last manager on duty. Her name tag was found in the office near the safe. James looked at Audrey, really looked at her. Saw the fear in her eyes, the desperate need to be believed. And for just a moment, just one terrible, doubt-filled moment, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. She'd been poor, desperate. Maybe the temptation had been too much. Maybe his faith in human nature, in the woman who'd given him dinner in the rain, had been misplaced. Maybe Clinton had been right about needing strict oversight, about the kind of person who... No, James caught himself, horrified at where his thoughts had gone. But the doubt had been there, and from the way Audrey's face crumpled, she'd seen it. "I need to take a statement," one of the officers said, not unkindly. "Miss Steve, if you could sit down and walk me through your movements last night." Audrey sank into the office chair, her hands clasped in her lap to hide their trembling. Around them, the morning staff had arrived for their shifts and stood in worried clusters, whispering. Janice looked almost satisfied, as if this confirmed everything she'd suspected. As the officer began asking questions, "What time did you close? Who else had access? Did you notice anything unusual?" Audrey felt the universe reasserting its natural order. Of course this was happening. Of course the moment she allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe things could be different, it all came crashing down. People like her didn't get lucky breaks. They got framed for crimes they didn't commit. They got reminded that no matter how hard they worked, how honest they were, the world would always find a way to put them back in their place. She answered the officer's questions mechanically, her voice flat, while James Quick stood near the door with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone about surveillance and access logs and timeline verification. But Audrey wasn't listening. She was already calculating how long she'd have before eviction, already wondering if Mrs. Chun would believe her innocence or if this would be the final straw, already feeling the weight of every whisper and rumor solidifying into confirmed truth in the minds of everyone watching. Through the office window, she could see Clinton Peters standing in the parking lot, his expression carefully arranged into concern. He'd shown up, he'd told the officers, because he'd heard something was wrong. Just wanted to help in any way he could. The police had thanked him for his cooperation. Their eyes met through the glass, and for just a second, Clinton's mask slipped. The satisfaction in his smile was unmistakable. Audrey looked away first, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. She'd give them her statement, accept whatever came next, but she wouldn't give them her tears. She'd save those for later, when she was alone, when the world had finished reminding her exactly where she belonged. James Quick hadn't built a fortune by being naive, and he certainly hadn't acquired a struggling restaurant chain by taking people at face value. 3 days after hiring Audrey, he'd had a security team install new cameras throughout the Silver Spoon Diner, not just the obvious ones customers could see, but hidden ones in the office, the storage areas, the back entrance. He wanted to know how his employees behaved when they thought no one was watching. It was a habit born from decades in business, from learning the hard way that people revealed their true character in moments of perceived privacy. So when the police arrived that Friday morning and began questioning Audrey, when he saw the doubt flicker across their faces and felt that terrible moment of uncertainty in his own chest, James had already pulled out his phone. "Officer," he said quietly, interrupting the interrogation. "Before we go any further, I need to show you something." The security footage loaded on his tablet with crystal clarity. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., Thursday night. The office was dark except for the security lighting, and for a moment, nothing moved. Then the back door opened. Clinton Peters appeared on screen, moving with the careful purpose of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly how wrong it was. He went straight to the safe, punched in the combination without hesitation, and opened it. The camera angle was perfect. James could see him counting out bills, pocketing them, his face tight with concentration. Then Clinton moved to the desk, picked up something small, Audrey's name tag, clearly visible in his palm, knocked over the stack of papers, placed the name tag deliberately beneath them. The footage was damning, incontrovertible, the kind of evidence that ended arguments before they could begin. Audrey's hand flew to her mouth, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob escaping. The police officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to professional focus. "How long have you had this footage?" the senior officer asked. "Since the system was installed 2 weeks ago. Continuous recording, cloud backup, tamper-proof." James's voice was level, but his eyes were hard as stone. "I want to press charges. Breaking and entering, theft, and whatever else you can make stick." Within the hour, Clinton Peters was in handcuffs. He'd been sitting in his car in the parking lot, playing the concerned former manager, when the police officers emerged from the diner and walked straight toward him. The confusion on his face had been almost comical, right up until they told him to step out of the vehicle and informed him he was under arrest. "What? There's been a mistake. I'm the one who reported." "We know what you reported, Mr. Peters. We also know what you did." The officer's tone was flat, professional, done with this particular brand of petty criminal. "You have the right to remain silent." The morning staff had gathered at the windows to watch. Sandra had her hand over her mouth. Keisha was filming on her phone. Janice's satisfied expression had evaporated into shocked silence as Clinton was led to the patrol car, his face cycling through denial, rage, and finally, terrified understanding. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 2 weeks ago, Audrey had been walked out in humiliation. Now Clinton was being walked out in handcuffs, his expensive shirt rumpled, his carefully constructed authority shattered beyond repair. Audrey stood in the doorway, watching him go. She didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vindicated, just tired and sad and grateful that the truth had been uncovered before it destroyed her. James appeared beside her, his hand briefly touching her shoulder, a gesture of support, nothing more. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for doubting you. Even for a moment." "You're human," Audrey replied, her voice steady despite everything. "Doubt is human. So is trust. I should have started there." 6 months later, the morning rain came down in sheets, drumming against the windows of what was no longer the Silver Spoon Diner. The new sign, elegant, understated, read second chances in script that caught the light even on gray days. Audrey Steve pulled into the parking lot in her modest but reliable Honda Civic, the windshield wipers working overtime against the deluge. No more duct tape shoes. No more counting pennies. No more terror at the thought of an unexpected expense. She was a co-owner now, 20% partner, her name on legal documents that still made her pause in disbelief when she saw them. The diner had become something more than just a restaurant. It was a community hub, known throughout the East Side for its policy of hiring people others wouldn't touch, formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless, formerly hopeless. James had put up the capital for the transformation, but Audrey had provided the vision, born from intimate understanding of what it meant to be one bad day away from disaster. She gathered her bag and was about to make a run for the door when movement caught her eye. A figure in a reflective orange vest, stabbing at trash with one of those picker tools, his shoulders hunched against the rain. Audrey's breath caught. Clinton Peters looked like a different person, 50 pounds lighter, his face gaunt and weathered in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with consequences. The vest marked him as community service, part of his sentence for theft and breaking and entering. He moved mechanically, without the swagger that had once defined him, just another invisible person doing invisible work that kept the city marginally cleaner. Their eyes met through the rain-streaked windshield. He looked away first, something like shame and hatred warring across his features before he returned his attention to a discarded coffee cup. Audrey could have driven to the other entrance, could have avoided him entirely. No one would have blamed her. In fact, most people would have encouraged it. Why expose yourself to someone who'd tried to destroy you? Instead, she grabbed an umbrella from the passenger seat and stepped out into the rain. "Clinton." He stiffened but didn't turn around. His hands tightened on the trash picker. "We're hiring for night shift," Audrey said, her voice carrying over the sound of rain on pavement. "Dishwasher position. Pays $15 an hour, above minimum wage. Benefits after 90 days. Applications are inside if you want one." Now he looked at her, his expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and finally landing on something close to shock. "Why would you?" His voice cracked. "After what I did." "Because everyone deserves to eat," Audrey said quietly, echoing words she'd spoken once in the rain to a different desperate man. "And everyone deserves a second chance. Even you." For a long moment, they stood there in the downpour, the woman who'd been broken and rebuilt, and the man who was still somewhere in the breaking process. Then Audrey turned and walked toward the diner, leaving the umbrella propped against the wall where Clinton could reach it if he wanted. Inside, James Quick stood at the window, his silver hair catching the light, a slight smile on his weathered face. He'd been watching the exchange, and when Audrey entered, shaking rain from her hair, her clothes damp despite her speed, he simply nodded in approval. "Coffee's fresh," he said, "and we have a new applicant coming in at 9. Referred from the halfway house. Did 3 years for check fraud, but his references from prison work programs are solid." "I'll do the interview," Audrey said, hanging up her jacket. Then she joined James at the window, and together they watched Clinton Peters stand in the rain, staring at the umbrella like it was a trap, a test, a lifeline he didn't deserve. Think he'll take it? James asked after a while. I don't know, Audrey admitted. Pride is a hard thing to swallow, and shame is harder. She paused, watching Clinton finally pick up the umbrella with shaking hands. But I had to offer. Someone once told me that kindness isn't about what people deserve. It's about who you choose to be. James glanced at her, curiosity and something like pride in his pale blue eyes. Wise person. Audrey smiled, a real smile that lit up her face. Yeah, he was standing in the rain. I almost missed him. They watched as Clinton moved slowly toward the diner entrance, the umbrella held awkwardly over his head. He paused at the door, visible through the glass, his face a battlefield of emotions. Then he reached for the handle and stepped inside, water dripping from his vest onto the welcome mat. Sandra looked up from behind the counter, her expression hardening when she recognized him. But Audrey moved forward, intercepting with professional calm. Applications are on the clipboard by the register, she said, neither warm nor cold, just matter of fact. Fill it out completely. We'll need references, and we do background checks, but we also believe in second chances. That's kind of our thing. Clinton took the clipboard with hands that trembled slightly, found a booth in the corner, the same booth where James had destroyed his world 6 months ago, and stared down at the blank form. Name. The pen hovered over the paper. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, washing the streets clean. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon filled the air, and the diner hummed with the ordinary miracle of people being fed, being employed, being given chances they hadn't necessarily earned but desperately needed. Clinton Peters pressed pen to paper and began, slowly and carefully, to write his name. The letters were shaky, uncertain, but they were there. Behind the counter, Audrey caught James's eye. He raised his coffee cup in a small salute, and she returned the gesture with her own. Sometimes justice looked like revenge. But sometimes, on the best days, it looked like rain washing away old stains, like empty application forms being filled, like broken people being given the space to rebuild. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Inside Second Chance's diner, the warmth held firm against the cold, and mercy, unexpected, undeserved, but offered anyway, sat in a corner booth, filling out an application with trembling hands. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.